This week's verse comes from Genesis chapters 32, verses 6 through 12, and 22 to 31. So I'll start from 6. When the messengers returned to Jacob, they said, "We went to your brother Esau, and now he's coming to meet you, and 400 men are with them." In great fear and distress, Jacob divided the people who were with him into two groups, and the flocks and the herds and camels as well. He thought, if Esau comes and attacks one group, the group that is left may escape. Then Jacob prayed, "O God of my father Abraham, God of my father Isaac, Lord, you who said to me, 'Go back to your country and your relatives, and I will make you prosper.' I am unworthy of all kindness and faithfulness you have shown your servant. I had only my staff when I crossed this Jordan, but now I have become two camps. Save me, I pray, from the hand of my brother Esau, for I am afraid he will come and attack me, and also the mothers with their children. But you have said, I will surely make you prosper, and will make your descendants like the sand of the sea, which cannot be counted." From verse 22. That night Jacob got up and took his two wives, his two female servants, and his 11 sons, and crossed the ford of Jabbok. After he had sent them across the stream, he sent over all his possessions. So Jacob was left alone, and the man wrestled with him till daybreak. When the man saw that he could not overpower him, he touched the socket of Jacob's hip so that his hip was wrenched as he wrestled with the man. Then the man said, "Let me go, for it is daybreak." But Jacob replied, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." The man asked him, "What is your name?" "Jacob," he answered. Then the man said, "Your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have struggled with God and with the humans and have overcome." Jacob said, "Please tell me your name." But he replied, "Why do you ask my name?" Then he blessed him there. So Jacob called the place Peniel and said, "It is because I saw God face to face, and yet my life was spared." The sun rose above him as he passed Peniel, and he was limping because of his hip. Therefore, to this day, the Israelites do not eat the tendon attached to the socket of the hip, because the socket of Jacob's hip was touched near the tendon.
Thanks. That's kind of cool music, actually. Years and years ago, in fact, just when I got out of university, I had a chance to preach this passage. It was the first year of me going here and there preaching. And I was looking at this passage. And Israel is a pretty famous name. It's a name of a nation, as well as the name of the people of God. In fact, Israel is supposed to be the name that characterizes the people of God in general, Israel. So that's a very special name. So it is very interesting to see the meaning of the name and when it was given. Israel means he struggles with God. Now that's a funny name. People of God, people that God chose, they are characterized by their struggle with God. But what surprised me years ago when I was trying to prepare the sermon from this passage was the next line. You have struggled with God and man, and you have overcome. And that took me aback. What do you mean you overcame God? Like, how do you even overcome God? How do you overcome the creator and sustainer of the universe, who runs and rules and breathes the very reality and existence to everything? How do you even overcome that? But leaving the theological question aside, even the story, Jacob didn't exactly overcome the man that God sent. The man merely touched Jacob's hips, and the hip was wrenched. And this wasn't a temporary thing. Jacob limped. Jacob had to limp whenever he had to walk for the rest of his life because his hip was wrenched. So, what do you mean you overcame God? To understand the life of Jacob and to understand why he was given the name Israel, he struggles with God and he overcame. You want to look at the life of Jacob. And 2 weeks ago, we covered the beginning of the story of Jacob. In fact, it's a very dramatic story of two brothers. Two brothers who are very unlike and who live in, I suppose, the shadow, the aftermath of faithful father and grandfather, Abraham and Isaac. They live seeing what it is like for God to pour out His blessing upon a particular family. They have grown up seeing what it is like for God to actually walk with a person. Isaac had it more easier because he saw Abraham's struggles. And his life, as we briefly mentioned last time we talked about this, his life was pretty easy because his life was simply based on the assumption that God acts and God acts powerfully. So Isaac's life was fairly easygoing. For him, miracle was a commonplace. And Jacob and Esau grew up watching Isaac, hearing the stories of Abraham, and they know in their heads, and they know by listening to the stories, that there is this God. And those people who God walks with, they are extremely blessed. So they understand about this blessing. But that's all they know. They are very much like most of the people in the church today. They hear about the stories of God. They read the Bible. They read the scriptures. They read about Jesus. And they know in their heads, and they have heard the stories, they read the stories of this powerful, powerful God that walks with His people. But oftentimes, these people have not experienced God for themselves. Now, Esau and Jacob was also a very interesting study of sibling rivalry. But it was a very one-sided sibling rivalry because Esau had everything and Jacob really fell behind Esau in every way. At least for that culture, at least for the standards of that culture. Esau was charismatic. He was physically strong. He had a very powerful presence. He was a powerful hunter, and that's what men in that culture were supposed to do. He drew other men to himself. He was a leader. He even got married early, so he was popular with the ladies. He looked manly in the sense that he had a full beard. Was a hairy man. Apparently, that was considered very manly, long time ago. Jacob was everything Esau wasn't. There were no other people surrounding him and chasing after him. He was not married. He didn't have ladies chasing after him. He was not a great hunter. He wasn't functioning as a productive member of the society, to put it very simply. He hung around with his mother. So in many ways, the one-sided sibling rivalry had Jacob in a disadvantage over in every area when you compare it with his brother Esau. But what Jacob really wanted was the blessing that his father Isaac had. So before this story began, Jacob tricks. In fact, his mother tricks him, but Jacob was in on it. They trick his father Isaac to give Jacob the blessing that he was going to give to his firstborn, Esau. And Esau gets extremely, extremely angry. And he swears that as soon as his father Isaac dies, Jacob will die with him. And Jacob, fearing for his life, flees. With the help of his parents, he flees to a faraway land and goes to a place called Haran, where his uncle Laban lives. And if you remember from last time, as he was going to that faraway place, he has a dream in a place that he would later call Bethel, a tall ladder that reaches up to the heavens with angels going up and down from it, and he meets God there. And God gives him this promise: I am the God of Abraham and Isaac. So you know who I am. You know who I'm speaking. You know who it is that is speaking to you. And the promise that I gave to your father and your grandfather, that this land I will give to your descendants, and I will give you descendants as many as the stars in the sky. This very same promise, really. So what God was saying is that I'm going to pass on this blessing and this task that I gave to your grandfather and father to you. And your part in it, and in fact, my participation, God's participation in your life in fulfilling your part in this promise, is that I will take you to that faraway land. I will make you prosper. I will bless you. and you will be able to come back to your homeland safe and sound. That was a promise. And Jacob gets up and he says, if that's what if you really do that, then you will be my God. It's an encounter with God, a personal encounter with God that he had only heard about. Now he has actually seen, but he has not fully been converted yet. He has not become a man of God yet. He is waiting and seeing whether God fulfills his promise. So what happens afterwards? Well, in this passage, the angel of God characterizes Jacob's life as the one who struggles with man and God. And that's what Jacob does. He gets to Haran and he searches for his uncle Laban. And he meets this girl that he apparently immediately fell in love with. Her name was Rachel. And he finds that this Rachel is the daughter of his uncle Laban. So when he meets Laban, he introduces himself as his nephew. And he says, well, I fell in love with your daughter. Can I marry her? And Laban is very happy. He hasn't heard from his sister in a long, long time. And he gets to see the son of his sister. And he says, sure, you work for me 7 years. I have a number of flock that I need to take care of, and I need more workers. So you work for me for 7 years, and I will give you my daughter Rachel. So Jacob forgets the troubles of his home. He forgets the fact that his older brother, very charismatic, very strong, superior older brother wants to kill him. He forgets all of that. He forgets the fact that he is working in a faraway land for basically no wages at all, because he is deeply in love with Rachel and he's very happy. He's going to marry the girl of his dreams, apparently. So he works for 7 years, and at the end of 7 years, he says, I worked for you 7 years. That was the deal. Now let me marry Rachel. And Laban goes, yes, I remember the promise. Well, we'll have a wedding ceremony very soon. So they go through the wedding ceremony, and the day after, now if you know how the Middle Eastern and ancient wedding ceremony goes, when you marry the person, I guess even today we do have that. We do have remnants of that tradition. We have a veil over the bride, right? Okay. So apparently this bride had a veil over her face throughout the entire ceremony, so you can't see her face. Until the wedding night, you can't see the bride's face. So what happened that night was that he lifted the veil and found out that this is not Rachel. This is some other girl. So he goes immediately back to Laban and says, what is the deal with this? You promised me, and I worked this isn't some 3 months of work. I worked for 7 years, and I cultivated, apparently he did. I cultivated my relationship with your daughter Rachel, and now you give me some other girl. And he knew who this was. This was Leah, the older sister to Rachel. And the Bible sort of politely describes Rachel as having, Leah as having weak eyes. So I'm guessing this is something along the lines of Rachel had very pretty eyes, very strong eyes, very eyes that sort of impressed you. Leah wasn't, appearance-wise, wasn't that great. Her eyes were kind of dead. I don't know what they mean by weak eyes, but something along the line. So he wasn't very attracted to Leah. So he came back, what is the deal? You promised me Rachel, and now you're pulling this thing on me. And Laban calmly replies saying, yeah, but our tradition is such that I can't give you the younger sister until the older sister gets married. Now, are you going to wait until the older sister gets married? Because that seems unlikely. So why don't you marry the older sister first, work for me 7 more years, and I'll give you Rachel. But here's a bonus. I'll give you Rachel next week. So this is I'm paying you first, work 7 years more. And Jacob, having no other choice, says, okay. So he works for another 7 years. He is already struggling with people. Not struggling with just any other people. He's struggling with his own uncle, his own flesh and blood. And if you're into sort of dramatic irony, you can sort of understand, you can see what's going on with Jacob. Jacob gets to where he is by tricking his brother and tricking his father. Now he is put into where he is, and he is stuck in where he is by being tricked by his own family members. I guess in today's language, if you were to see this in a TV show or something, people would say, yeah, that's a karmic backlash. Is that a term for it? It's a karmic backlash or something. 7 years he works. And after 7 years, he's like, I'm finally done. 14 years, he goes back to his uncle and says, okay, for 14 years, I have labored for you. Now I'm married with both your daughters. Now I want to go back home. And Laban thinks for a while and says, yeah, but I did a sort of a divination recently. And you might have noticed, but my wealth has been increasing day by day. I've been getting filthy rich after you came here. And when I checked it out, apparently it's because of you. So, I'm going to give you a deal. Work for me 7 more years, and you name the price this time. So you got to marry my daughters. This time you get to have your own wages. And Jacob thinks for a while and says, okay, as you know, I'm married with children, but because I've been working for you, I have nothing of my own. So, as I'm tending your flock, let me have some of your flock. That will be my wages. And Laban says, what do you want? And he says, well, let's make it like this. Not just any flock, but the flock that is sheep or goats or whatever that have flecks or those weird patterns on their fur or on their wool. I will take them. So that when you check over my flock, you can't say, oh, that's mine, because it'd be obvious, right? You would have like flecks or spots on it, and that would definitely be mine. Laban says, okay, that sounds good. The very same day, it says, he calls over his sons, Laban calls over his sons and says, take all the speckled and spotted sheep and goats, take them far away so that Jacob can get it. So technically, I'll be fulfilling my deal, but Jacob gets nothing. I still get his blessing. He didn't actually say that, but that was his action. So he took the flock far away, and Jacob saw this, and he realizes that he's being cheated once again by his uncle. So what he does is that he takes a branch of a wood, he sort of puts spots on it or flecks on it. So whenever the sheep or the goats were mating, there he would sort of put it right near them, and he would do so only when the stronger and the healthier sheep or the goats were mating, so that all the stronger and healthier sheep or the goats would come to him. Now, if you know a bit about genetics, it doesn't work like that. Just because you see some flocks from flecked or spotted branches, that doesn't mean that you're going to give birth to spotted or flecked sheep or anything like that. It doesn't work that way. And very likely, the people in those days also knew. This is why Laban took all the sheep and goats away. What Jacob reveals later on is that he saw this in a dream. So he knows this is some sort of a wish, like he's making a wish, he's making a prayer. And miraculously, all the good flock came over to Jacob for 7 years. Now, nearing the end of the 7 years, Laban and his sons have been looking around the flock, and they're realizing more and more that Jacob is getting richer and richer. Now, they're also being blessed because Jacob is around, but they started having this huge amount of resentment over Jacob's successes, and they started grumbling against him. And they, as various other precautions, they started changing his wages. So one day, and they would say, "Okay, you get the flecked or spotted sheep." And then next day, they would say, "Okay, we changed our minds. You get these striped ones." And every time they do this, Jacob would still get blessed. So they began to treat Jacob more and more coldly until Jacob said, okay, enough is enough. I work for 7 more years, and if I stay here any longer, I don't know what my uncle or my cousins will do to me, so I want to go back home. And he sees, once again in the dream, where God appears to him and says, I blessed you so far, and now it is time for you to go back home. So he goes back. Now, I'm telling you this story because I want you to understand what's been happening in Jacob's life. His 21 years of working for his uncle is actually filled with struggle and fighting and backstabbing with his own family members. He is struggling to make a living. He is struggling to take every single coin, as it were, every single dollar, every single sheep or goat or donkey or camel. That's their currency those days. He's struggling to get each single one of them because they are also struggling against him to take his wealth away. What would it feel like working for your own family, knowing that your family is out to cheat you out of your wealth? What would it feel like knowing that they are using your blessing, using the fact that you're blessed to line their pockets while leaving you impoverished? And Jacob responds by bringing his own tricks, almost the pseudo-magical tricks of putting weird branches where his flocks are, and all of those things to get just one more sheep or goat for himself. But that's not the end of his struggle, because there was struggle with his own wives as well. Now, if you remember, he married both Leah and Rachel. Leah knows that she's not loved. She has weak eyes, whatever that means. And Rachel knows that she is loved. So Leah prays, and he says God sort of saw that Leah was not loved, and God started giving Leah children. So the first 4 children that Jacob had were by Leah. And Rachel gets angry because she doesn't have children. And I told you about this before. Having children in those days is part of your identity as a human being. And for women, if you can't have children, you're not fulfilling one of your main function as a member of society in those days. So Rachel gets angry at Jacob, and Jacob responds by this humorous comment: "Why are you getting angry at me for? Like, am I God that I can give you children when God stopped you? Like, what do you want me to do?" So Rachel starts fighting with Leah. Leah starts fighting with Rachel, and they start bringing maidservants so that they can have adopted children. And the children, we'll find out next week too, started fighting against one another. Or rather, they start sort of going after Joseph later on when Rachel actually does have a son. And Jacob has to deal with all this. Rather like our lives. We find that as we grow and as we pass through various stages in life, there are more and more things that we need to struggle with. Before, when we were in school, the only thing that we need to struggle with is basically homework, possibly other school children. Then you have to deal with exams. Then you have to deal with getting into university. Then you have to deal with jobs. And once you get a job, you think everything's over, but no. With jobs come other social responsibilities, other financial concerns, or the people you have to deal with. And oftentimes people that you don't want to deal with, you have to deal with because it's part of your job. When you have a family, that's even more responsibilities. And none of these things come easy. It feels as if, and in my own experience as well, you're like trying to stay afloat. You know what I mean? You're in the water, your feet is not reaching the bottom, and you're trying to stay afloat. It's easy for the first 2 minutes or so, but after a while, it's just a struggle. And life is quite a bit like that. And in the hard times, it really is. It's each day is a new struggle, and you don't want to think about what's going to happen the next day because you don't know how to get through it. Jacob, his life is characterized by struggle with people. When he goes back home, his uncle chases after him. And God appears to his uncle in a dream and says, Laban, I don't want you to do anything to Jacob or say anything to Jacob, either good or bad. So Laban stops and meets Jacob and says, you shouldn't have run away because Your wives are my daughters. Your children are my grandchildren. So that was a pretty mean thing for you to do. But let's make a promise. I won't harm you. You won't harm me. We'll just remain sort of a distant friends. So that sort of went well. Jacob continues on to his homeland, and he hears that Esau is sort of around in his old home somewhere. So he sent a messenger saying, hey brother, remember me, your younger brother Jacob? How have you been doing? I haven't seen you in a long time. What's going on with you? And the messenger comes back, and this is our passage. Messenger comes back and says, your brother is coming back. Your brother is coming to meet you. And he's bringing 400 men with him. Not just 400 people, 400 grown fighting men with him. And Jacob's thinking, okay, why on earth would my brother bring 400 grown fighting men with him? Man, his grudge lasts really, 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 really long. He is still planning to kill me. Why else would he be bringing 400 men with him? So immediately, and this is what Jacob does. Jacob is used to struggling with other people, so that he is used to making all of these contingency plans. So he immediately starts separating his camps. He is doing risk assessment and saying, okay, if my brother attacks one camp, the other camp can run away. So let's separate these groups by importance. Remember, even his own family's fighting. Rachel and her children, they're the most important. So she's in the farthest away camp. And Leah is important, not as important as Rachel, but Leah and her children is in the other camp, and the maidservant who became, I guess, sort of wives, and their children, they'll be in some other camp, and I'll be in this camp. So I can spread the risk around. Okay, what else can I do? All right, I know, I'll pacify him with gifts. So he brings, I would guess, a large portion of his wealth, 200-something sheep, 200-something goats, and several dozen donkeys and camels. And he sends them over to Esau, but he doesn't just send them over. He says, okay, I'm going to break them up into groups, so that Esau is going to receive one gift, one sort of wealth, and not only that, he's going to become sort of happy when he first sees them. He'll be like, oh, well, this Jacob, I guess he's trying to please me, but I'm still angry. He's likely going to do that. So I'm going to send them step by step. So each time Esau is going to encounter my gift, and he'll become, less and less angry. Okay, what else can I do? I'm going to put some camps across the river, and I'm going to put some other camps across the other river, so that when he goes and attacks this camp, it's going to be very difficult to go and attack the other camp. He starts setting out all of these plans. And very likely, when we are put into similar situations with similar troubles, we start forming many, many different plans for it. We are used to it. If we haven't been doing so, then likely we wouldn't have gotten far in society. And that's what Jacob did. He struggles. He wrestles with man. He wrestles with his life. He wrestles with his situations. He tries to wring out the best result from whatever he got. He is determined to find success, even though he has always been the underdog. He has been the underdog compared to his brother. He has been the underdog in the shadow of his uncle and his relatives. He is trying to get the best out of whatever he has. He wrestles with his life and other people. But the thing is, he wrestles and he has struggled with God. What does that mean? You see, all the things that Jacob went through isn't just him trying to succeed in life. By the way, that is what he's trying to succeed. Jacob is interesting because out of many, many different individuals and characters that you will encounter in the Bible that's supposed to be the man of God, he doesn't do very godly things. He's just he's basically out for himself. He's out to get the things that he wants. He's out to succeed. He's out to increase his wealth and family. But at the same time, in his greed, in his search for success and search for acknowledgement, really, by the people around him, God is involved. It was God who met him on his way to that faraway land, Haran, and said, I'm going to bless you and I'm going to bring you back to this land. I'm going to give you the same blessing I gave to your forefathers. Notice what Jacob says when he prays to God. God of my father Abraham, God of my father Isaac, O Lord, you're the one who said to me, go back to your country and your relatives, and I will make you prosper. I am unworthy of all the kindness and faithfulness you have shown your servant. I had only my staff when I crossed the Jordan, and now I have become two groups. Save me, I pray, from the hand of my brother Esau, for I am afraid that he will come and attack me. But you said, I will surely make you prosper and make your descendants like the sand of the sea, which cannot be counted. He has lived with the stories of Abraham, his grandfather, Isaac, his father, of what God has been doing in their lives, and he has now experienced some of what God has been doing in his life. And he has received that promise, and he's using this promise as almost a leverage in this prayer. You're the one who said this, so you got to fulfill it. It's not like I'm just giving you my wishes here. You said it, and you gave me the promise. Fulfill it, O Lord. The thing is, as he has been walking with God, God has been very strangely, if you really, really think about the story, he has been strangely ambiguous. What do I mean by that? He has been ambiguous. In one way, he has poured out on Jacob many blessings. Wherever he went, wealth grew, flocks grew. He succeeded in whatever thing that he tried to do. But at the same time, he always encountered obstacles to sort of offset this success. Yes, God blessed him when he was shepherding the flocks, but then he allowed him to be under the care or under the exploitation of his uncle, who took away a lot of his wealth. Yes, God has successfully brought him back to this land with flocks. He only had a staff in his hand. He only had clothes on his back. And now he has a very large family and servants and a lot of wealth that came with him. Yes, God did that. Jacob could only acknowledge that. But at the same time, God allows his brother Esau to bring 400 fighting men against him. What's the deal with that? It is as if God is giving him one thing and then hitting him with the other. It is like God saying, okay, I'm going to bless you, but then I'm going to start taking things away too. God is giving him mixed signals. That is why Jacob is praying, I'm unworthy. I acknowledge that you have been faithful to me. But, what's up with Esau? It's been 20 years and he's trying to kill me. He's still trying to kill me. And I'm very afraid. But you're the one that promised this. I assume that I was blessed because you promised all this. But this isn't a single night thing, by the way. For 21 years, if you imagine going through all of the struggles with his own family members, with his own difficult situation, he has been praying. He has been struggling with God, saying, God, if you have promised me, then fulfill it. And it culminates in that one night where he's praying. And you could almost describe this as him having met a deadline. It's a deadline. God needs to come through by that very night, or the next day he's going to die. That's what it means by a deadline. God, you have fulfilled a lot of your promises, but this one thing you need to fulfill or everything's over. This is why he prays for the entire night. I don't know how many of us have prayed for hours for an entire night. But I tell you, if your entire life is on the line and you have done everything you could, Jacob pulled every trick that he could ever think of to protect himself and his family, but he knows it's likely not enough. And he's hanging on to God. That's what he means. And that's what it means by wrestling with God. a man wrestled with him until daybreak. Everything's done, everything's prepared. And he's confronting God. And the central question that he has, because God has been, quite frankly, been ambiguous in how he has acted toward Jacob, he wants to know, have you really blessed me? Are you acknowledging me? Yes or no? Yes or no? And when you pray like this, when you are struggling with God, when you're trying to wring out from God His acknowledgement, wring out from God His response as you pray, and it seems as if, and God is often like this, God is ambivalent or silent. It feels as if God is simply staring at you. You know He's there. If you have experienced God enough, you know He's there, but He's not responding. He's just looking at you. And you're grabbing hold of God in your prayer, saying, God, respond. God, do something. God, you promised this or that. And as you pray, maybe 10 minutes, 30 minutes, perhaps an hour, and God still remains silent, it becomes a struggle. And as you struggle and struggle, you struggle with your own doubts. You struggle with your own fears. You are reminded of the things that perhaps you did wrong in your life. There's perhaps voices inside your head saying, remember all of these things. Why would God help you now? But then you have the other side where you remember things that God has done, in things that God has been faithful to. So you can't quite let that go either. There is this very delicate and dangerous balance as you pray like this, where there seems to be the voice of encouragement of God on the one hand, and the voice of fear on the other hand. And you're wrestling and you're trying to wring things out. You're trying to wring out answers from God. Yet God still did not respond. Hours and hours go by and it's daybreak, and the sun is slowly rising in the east. And the man wants to go, but Jacob is not letting go. And Jacob by this time understands that both, as he was praying, he has been struggling with a sort of a divine figure. So he's not letting go. And the man touches Jacob's hips and he gets wrenched. And in extreme agony and pain, Jacob still holds on. So the man finally gives up and says, okay, look, it's daybreak. Haven't you had enough yet? I mean, you've been praying for a long time, by the way. That's a lot of effort. So it's daybreak. Give it a rest. Let me go. And Jacob says this one very powerful thing. Not until you bless me. This is a power of Jacob's prayer. When you wrestle with God, you wrestle with Him until you get somewhere. You know, we fight for many things, don't we? I don't mean like literally fight, but we struggle for many things. We pour out our sweat, and in some cases blood and tears, to get the things that are valuable to us. We put our work into it. And in relationship, we heard the saying, right? You have to fight for your relationship. You have to fight for your marriage. At least I hope you do. The things that we don't fight for, we usually don't care for. If there are things that we thought we really wanted, but we can't get it, and if you say, oh, well, that's too bad, and we walk away, that likely means that we didn't really care for it in the first place. You fight for what you are desperately seeking for. But the thing is, if you look in our own lives and if you look in our own hearts, how hard do we fight for God? What I mean is, how hard do we fight? How hard do we pull on God? How hard do we wrestle with God until we get somewhere? And this is not a single night thing, Mosaic. As I said, this has been going on for 21 years. It's not, this is merely the finishing line, a finishing story of Jacob. And when you do this, we often will feel like, and if you have prayed for, say, even 30 minutes or so, we'll feel, we may often hear things like this in our own heads. Okay, I pray for 30 minutes. I'm a very busy person. I have to get to my workplace or whatever. 30 minutes a lot. That's good enough. It's good enough. But then there are times when it's 30 minutes, an hour, 2 hours, 10 hours, days, months, years are not good enough. It's not good enough until you get somewhere. It's not good enough until God responds. So when God says to Jacob, it's good enough. You have been struggling with me all these years, and you have been struggling with me for an entire night. It's good enough. Jacob says, no, it's not until you acknowledge me. Jacob has been fighting for acknowledgement. Jacob has been fighting for his own place in the world, against all the people in the world, against his own families, and this time with God. And what he's saying is that, okay, beyond everything else, I want you to acknowledge me. Beyond everything else, I want you to bless me. I want you to establish your relationship with me because that was your promise. And we, the church, have the same promise, by the way. When we say Jesus Christ died for us and rose again from the dead and we have his life, we are saying that God is establishing that same promise of that relationship. Not a promise necessarily of getting wealth or anything like that, but that's the promise. But we oftentimes, unlike Jacob, we don't hold on. We don't scream out to God saying, I'm not letting you go until you show me that you acknowledge me. What does Israel mean? What does people of God mean? There are people who first and foremost struggle with God. You can struggle against the world, against your workplace. You can struggle with various situations in your life. You have to. That's part of life. But the first thing that you need to struggle with, first thing that you need to grab hold of and get somewhere is God. That's what being people of God means. For those of you who have heard a little about the retreat, apparently the retreat was very powerful. I say apparently, although I was actually there. And it was a very powerful experience. The Pastor Danny called people to stand up. He said something like, stand up if you want to be used by God, or something like that. And he says, everyone close your eyes so you don't peek. And I try not to peek. But you know when you watch very, very scary movies, your eyes sort of squint open. Okay, and I didn't want to do that, so I put my head on the ground and I was sitting down because the reason why I'm here is I already stood up when someone else said that a long time ago. So I sort of squinted my eyes open while looking at the ground, and all I see are feet. You know what I mean? Because most people stood up. I squinted my eyes open because I heard people like move. I'm like, what is going on here? I thought maybe 3 or 4, but all I see are feet. And I was pressured actually to stand up because I felt kind of like ashamed. Like, why am I sitting down? I know I should be sitting down, but why am I? So most people apparently stood up. I suspect that a number of people stood up because they felt pressured to do so. That's what I think. I'm cynical that way, yes. I also guess that people who did stand up, part of them also were stood up because they were pressured to do so, even though much of their motivation remained God-centered. But nevertheless, that sort of thing happened. And the people who prepared for this retreat have been telling me that they haven't seen something like this in a long, long time. However, you wouldn't have seen something like this unless you have fought for this church. If you haven't struggled for it, if you haven't been wrestling with God for it, you wouldn't see something like this. Then the epilogue to Jacob's story is that after he prayed, and God said, your name is no longer Jacob but Israel because you have struggled with God and men and you have overcome. The next day, Esau comes with 400 fighting men. Esau runs over to him, hugs him, and cries, saying, "Oh, good to see you." And then he says, why did you give me all of this flock? He meets the family too. And why did you give me all of this flock? I don't need it. Just take it for yourself. And Jacob says this line, No, keep them, because seeing your face right now is like seeing the face of God. Now, part of this is pure flattery, by the way, but he literally means this in many ways. It's not that Esau's face is particularly divine, but because he had struggled with God, because he had wrestled with God and gotten an acknowledgement from God the night before, the fact that Esau came to him and hugged him and forgave him, that was the face of God. Do you want to see the face of God? Do Mosaic wants to see the face of God? Or, for those of you who have gone to the retreat and seen the face of God there, very likely that was because you have wrestled with God. So when stuff happened in the retreat, people outside the church may look at the retreat and say, that's a nice retreat. People were praying, people were running after each other like crazy, praying for each other. That was kind of heartwarming. Yeah, sure. That's all they would see. But if you have struggled and wrestled with God and held on to God and fought for it, then that retreat would have another meaning. You would have seen the face of God. So let us take this moment, a minute or so, to reflect. How hard have you fought to meet God? How hard have you struggled with God so that God will turn around and call you Israel? Lord Father, we come before you with a desire. We are called by your name, and we, throughout our lives, struggle with many things. We go after many things, but oftentimes we don't struggle with you, but we want to be acknowledged by you. We want to know you more. We want, as this church, for your hand to be real in this church and in our own lives as well. So, Lord Father, we pray. We want to grab hold of you, and we want to struggle with you, and we want to bring out from you your acknowledgement. We want to fight for our relationship. We want to fight for our relationship in prayer and in fellowship and in study and in our walk in life. Lord Father, as you grab a hold of you, O Lord, look at us and respond to us. In the name of Jesus Christ we pray. Amen.